And we're back. You're listening to the Talkin Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. And it's that time again when we shine the heavyweight spotlight on a heavyweight fighter of years gone by. And joining me right now to tell us about this week's heavyweight spotlight, which is former world champion Ray-Mercer, is my man Jim Curl. What's up, Jim?
Hey, how's it going, Billy?
Not too bad, not too bad. Heavyweight spotlight. We've been kind of shying away a little bit because of me, not because of you. I know you've been ready to roll, but we chose a good one this week, Ray-Mercer. Tell us about this guy.
Yeah, Merciless Ray-Mercer. Yeah, he was a darn good fighter and a real tough guy. You know, he joined the Army right after high school, spent 9 years in there. That's where he learned how to box, compiling a pretty impressive amateur record of 64-6. I should probably tell you he was born in Jacksonville, Florida, in April '61, and like I said, he joined the Army after high school. His dad was a lifer in the Army, and one thing I didn't know about Ray, even though I had been a pretty big fan of his, was he won a gold medal in the 1988 Seoul Olympics.
Yeah,
in the heavyweight division.
When I watched him in the Olympics, I remember following Ray-Mercer when he was in the Olympics, and I said, you know, this is the guy, this is the next guy. I mean, because when he came, when he hit the heavyweight division, when he turned pro after the Olympics, we needed somebody, and I said Ray-Mercer is the guy. I became a huge fan of Ray-Mercer from the Olympics on. I didn't know some of his stories about how he got involved with boxing. Did you ever hear about that?
Yeah, as far as I know, it all happened when he was in the Army. That's when he got involved with it, and he wound up winning the U.S. Amateur Championship. And that was in 1988, and he turned pro in '89. And after he got out of the Army, he spent 9 years in there, and he began his professional career with a third-round knockout of a guy named McGee.
Jesse McGee.
Long-forgotten Jesse McGee.
Yep, and back in Atlantic City, he fought several times in Atlantic City. But let me give you a little story. This is from Ray. You know, I got a lot of opportunities to chat with Ray one-on-one, and here's the scoop. He was in the Army. He was known for, you know, having a few suds and brawling a little bit. And, you know, the boxing, the guy that was in charge of the boxing team got wind of it and basically came up to Ray-Mercer and said, hey, you want to join the boxing team? And Ray was like, nah. He had no interest, never fought. The guy never put on a pair of gloves before. And basically he was conned into joining the boxing team because they promised him that he wouldn't have to lay out in the field. His unit was constantly out in the field in the rain and the mud, and they said, listen, you join the boxing team, you won't have to be out in that field anymore. We'll be taking care of you. And he said, sign me up, man. And that's the reason that he didn't want to go. He didn't want to go in the field for his normal duties in the Army, and the rest is history. Right.
Oh, that's a great story.
I just recently did the Pacquiao Mayweather fight night special we did down in St. Simon's Island at Sal's restaurant, and he was there, and we talked a little about that and some other stuff. But go ahead, I just wanted to fill you in on that.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah, it's funny.
He started his career in 1989, and he ran off a string of impressive victories. One of them over Smokin' Burt Cooper, which I watched that fight, and that was an entertaining brawl, let me tell you.
Entertaining is an understatement. that fight was, listen, anybody out there that's listening or watching our heavyweight spotlight right now, if you have not seen the Ray-Mercer versus Burt Cooper fight that took place on August 5th in 1990, go check it out. It is available up on YouTube. And you know what, Jim? Ray said that was his toughest fight of his whole career. He said that was a killer fight. And when you mention it to him, he just puts his head down and goes, oh, man, Burt Cooper, man. That was a great fight.
Well, Burt Cooper was a tough guy. You know? He was, they didn't call him Smokin' Burt Cooper after Joe Frazier for nothing.
No, and that was early in his career. Remember, well, actually, that was right around the middle of his career because he kept going on and on. As a matter of fact, I think he fought a few years ago, but he was at his best when he stepped in against Merciless Ray.
Yeah, Cooper was only 24 years old when they fought, so
yeah.
He was right there in his prime.
Yeah, well, right after that fight, that got him his shot at the world heavyweight title against Francisco Dominani, and he came out pretty well in that one. Tell us about that.
Yeah, he did take on Francisco Dominani. That was I believe it was for the WBO heavyweight title.
Correct.
And of course, he was eyeing bigger prizes. You know, he wanted to get into the ring with guys like Morrison and Larry Holmes and get a shot at the bigger titles, the WBA and stuff like that. But yeah, he took on Francisco Damiani and won that fight. And the next fight, which I'm sure you're going to bring up here pretty quick, was the demolishment of Tommy Morrison.
Yeah.
I watched that fight live, and I was a big fan of both guys. So I didn't know who to root for, and I watched that fight with my dad. And boy, Tommy Morrison looked fantastic for the first 5 rounds until Ray caught him and just unloaded. One of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And let's pause for 1 second. The WBO was in its infancy back then. And as a matter of fact, Francisco Dominani was the first world heavyweight titleist for the World Boxing Organization, which made Ray-Mercer the second. And I tell you, when we look back at it and watching it back then and Tommy Morrison coming in and people were hoping he was going to win this fight and everything else, the Great White Hope at that time. And, when you look at the World Boxing Organization then and now, they've come a long way. I mean, I think they're one of the better of the top 4 sanctioning bodies. I really do. And Ray-Mercer was a world champion for the WBO.
Sure, like you were saying, the WBO had just come along. I remember when it was in its infancy, and it wasn't as respected as it is nowadays. I would say, you didn't look at a guy that had the WBO title so much as the heavyweight champion.
Right. It was the new kid on the block, and they definitely had to go through their trials and tribulations, but now they're regarded as one of the top 4. So anyway, I didn't want to ruin that.
Yeah.
The Tommy Morrison fight, great for Ray, not so much for Tommy to Duke Morrison.
Morrison looked like $1 million for the first 5 rounds, and then that knockout was just brutal. I remember Morrison sitting in his corner, and he was so dazed, he was still throwing punches after the fight was over.
Yeah.
Well, they're throwing, jabbing and left hook, and they're telling him, "Hey, Tommy, wake up, wake up."
Yeah, Ray-Mercer was a powerful fighter, and if you see him today, he's still in decent shape. He still looks like he can inflict some damage on you. But the other thing that was so impressive of Ray-Mercer was his chin. I mean, he had a granite chin. This guy just. I think he unnecessarily, because of the lack of defense, I think he was so offensive-minded that he took unnecessary punishment. But thank God, no ill effects to this day, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, he definitely had a solid chin. He was only knocked down, twice in his entire career? Knocked out once and knocked down by Holyfield once?
Yep. Well, he was on the books. He was stopped 2 times.
Right.
In his career, once by Vladimir Klitschko, that was a TKO in 2002, and then Shannon Briggs stopped him. They ruled that a knockout.
Right, the Briggs fight.
Yeah, but he was
Holyfield knocked him out with a body punch.
Yeah, he was not that Vladimir Klitschko fight. I remember talking to Ray about it, and he said that that's the only fight that he regrets because he did not give it his all. He says he makes no excuses for any other fight or loss in his career except for that one. He said he took it really lightly, and if he could do it all over again, that's the only fight that he really would want to fight over. He said he sold out on himself. He said he just didn't train properly for that fight, and it showed.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I did watch that fight, and he definitely got his butt kicked.
Yeah, no doubt.
But he was on the way out, and Vladimir was on his way up.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt about that. But let's go back again. After the Tommy Morrison fight, he got that fight against Larry Holmes that he wanted. Now, granted, Larry Holmes was well beyond his prime, but he lost that fight. That was kind of a strange fight. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, he did. He was outfoxed by the old guy. I think maybe he underestimated Larry a little bit. I mean, Larry was 42 years old, but he could still jab. He still had a nice jab, and he just outfoxed him, and it was a bad thing because, after beating Francisco Damiani and Tommy Morrison, I mean, Ray-Mercer was on the road to getting a heavyweight title. I mean, come on. The guy was looking fantastic, and then he loses to a 42-year-old Larry Holmes.
Yeah, but, I forget what happened there, to be honest with you. He beat Tommy Morrison, and then the Larry Holmes fight, there was no title on the line. Was he stripped? I don't recall. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank. Was he stripped of the WBO belt? What was the story there? Do you remember?
He gave up the WBO belt because he was supposed to. They wanted him to fight Michael Moorer, and he didn't want to fight Moorer for some reason, and instead wanted to fight Holmes, probably bigger name and more money, I would imagine.
Yeah, way bigger money. It was in Atlantic City. Ray-Mercer fought a lot of times in Atlantic City. He was very popular in Atlantic City. So yeah, okay. I forgot that. I knew that he gave up the belt or was stripped or something, but I forgot it. I forgot Michael Moorer was a player in that situation. Ironically enough, both of those guys were at our event for the Pacquiao Mayweather fight. That's funny. I should have brought that up. But he went back and arguably the worst stretch of his career was 3 fights in a row. He fought to a 10-round split decision against journeyman Marion Wilson, followed by unanimous decision loss to Evander, and then a majority decision loss to Lennox Lewis, which was a close fight. Tell us about those 3.
Yeah, the Lennox Lewis fight, it's interesting that the Associated Press had the fight for Mercer. They scored the fight for Mercer. It was a very close fight. And most people thought he should have won that fight.
Yeah.
And it goes back to our old argument, can these shorter, smaller guys compete with the bigger guys? And, Mercer at 6'1", taking on Lennox Lewis, who was, 6'6", 6'5", and he knew how to fight those bigger guys. He was good at it. And he should have probably won that fight. I watched the fight. I thought it was very close.
I think you got to give credit to Lennox Lewis for keeping Ray away just far enough where he couldn't land anything. But, I asked Ray-Mercer one-on-one about that you just mentioned about fighting the bigger guys. And he said he preferred it. He said he felt like he had the edge when he fought the bigger guys. So, and he knew how to get underneath it. He was a little anxious in that fight. He said that particular fight seemed to go very quickly for him. But I think a lot of the heavyweights today just don't know how to get under a jab if they're outsized height-wise as much as he was with Lennox Lewis.
Right, and it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of heavyweight fighters too that weren't real tall. Even guys like Ernie Shavers, and they all say the same thing. They like fighting the bigger guys. They seem to have an easier time of it. And even when I was doing research on Jersey Joe Walcott, he said the same thing when he went over to Germany to fight. I can't remember the guy's name now, but the guy was 6'5" or 6'6", and he said he liked fighting those guys.
Yeah.
So all these guys say the same thing. They prefer the taller guys.
Well, the guys that say that are the guys that know what they're doing, bro.
That know how to fight the bigger guys. Just like Lennox or just like Vladimir Klitschko knows how to fight the smaller guys now. He's become proficient with it.
Exactly. I've said that all the time. He's become, and if you watch his earlier fights, he did not do it. But he and Vitali at the end of his career, they became proficient at fighting the smaller guy. I say it all the time. If you even watch them deliver their punches, they've become in a downward motion. That's why it's interesting. It will be interesting to see Vladimir Klitschko fight Tyson Fury. Not that Tyson Fury is as talented as Klitschko, but he poses a threat that I don't know if Klitschko, is used to, a guy bigger than him, So
no, I think you're right. I think it's going to be a big difference for him. Instead of a guy who's 6'1", now you got a guy who's 6'7".
Well, back to Ray-Mercer. After the Lennox Lewis fight, he basically, I don't know. His career was totally on the upswing. He was getting all the wins by knockout over the guys that he should. In 2002, he got another shot at the world title against Vladimir Klitschko. Was stopped in the 6 rounds with that one, like we talked about. He honestly felt, and he wasn't trying to make excuses, but he felt that he just didn't prepare himself for that fight. When you rewatched it, can you see the lack of preparation, in your opinion, on Ray-Mercer's part?
Yeah, I could. He had a bit of a spare tire going on. Looked a little flabby, and he was getting older. He was either 41 or 42 when he took Vladimir Klitschko, and it's funny because he was saying he was going to do to him what Larry Holmes had done to Mercer. He was going to outfox the younger guy and use his experience, but yeah, by the 6th round, and Klitschko looked really good. His jab was solid, and like we were just saying, he knew how to keep that smaller guy away. And Ray didn't look real good. He didn't look real fresh. He didn't look sharp. And I think age was catching up to him, and he was on the downswing.
Can you believe that fight was 13 years ago?
Yeah. Can you believe that Vladimir Klitschko, he's still dominant?
That's my point. 13 years ago, he was a champion there, and it's hard. I'm not a big fan of Vladimir Klitschko. I think he's a boring fighter and everything, but it's hard to deny him the props. This is a guy that has controlled the division, be as it may. You and I can look back at these great fighters and make all the excuses in the world. He would have never beat a Jersey Joe, et cetera, et cetera. But nobody else has dominated a division like him, and he can only be criticized for who's available. So again, we're going. It's like the Vladimir Klitschko spotlight. But anyway, after that, he got back up on his horse and rattled off a bunch of wins until he stepped in the ring in 2005 against Shannon Briggs, and he lost to a Shannon Briggs. Again, 10 years ago, and now we're seeing Shannon Briggs trying to make a comeback. But that could have arguably have been the best Shannon Briggs that laced on a pair of gloves, was the guy that stepped in the ring to face Ray-Mercer in 2005.
Yeah, Shannon was at his peak at that point, and like I was saying earlier, Ray was, he was getting in his 40s. He was on his way out, and Shannon Briggs was coming up and young and hungry and strong. And Shannon Briggs had a lot of power. He could pop, and he took him out, knocked him out in the 7th round.
That was the only knockout loss.
Yeah.
I mean, he did get the TKO stoppage against Vladimir a couple of years previously, but his only stoppage loss of his 7 losses. He did take a 2-year break, and he came back in 2007, demolished journeyman Mikkel Lindblad, and then a year later, he fought Derek Rossi, and this is when, no disrespect to Derek Rossi, but this is when I believe deep down, Ray-Mercer and myself, I knew too that it was over for him. Yeah,
it was definitely over. It was time to start thinking about retirement. I'm thinking at that point, but he didn't retire. He went on to other things, but.
Well, he went on to one more fight. I think that fight against Hercia, or however you pronounce it, Raquel Hercia, was a 6-round fight. I think he was just trying to end his career with a W. He struggled in that fight.
Right.
It was a majority decision win, and he called it a career after that.
Right, yeah, over in Sweden. Yeah, he called it a career until he decided to get into the MMA.
That's
martial
right.
Arts.
That's right. I forget how he did in that. I think he won one, didn't he? Didn't he destroy somebody?
Took on Tim Sylvia, and that guy was 6'8", and he knocked Sylvia out with one single right hand.
Yeah, he walked up
9 seconds into the fight.
Right, I think I remember seeing a clip. He just kind of walked up to him, bam, knocked him out.
Yeah, and Ray was like 48 years old at that point,
Yeah.
And he just knocks him out. And then he fought Kimbo Slice, but Kimbo got him in a chokehold and choked him out.
Yeah, I forget that. I've now that you mention it, I remember it, but I forgot it when we first started talking. But Ray-Mercer was the type of fighter, Jim, that came right at you, and you know, it was nothing fancy about this guy, but I don't know, there was just something I really, really liked about Ray-Mercer from the time he won the gold right up until his last fight.
Yeah, no, I was always a big Ray-Mercer fan. Even in his earlier days, I remember seeing him really young, you know, right out of the Army. Probably had half a dozen fights, and I remember seeing him. I don't know what it was on, Tuesday night fights or something, and I liked him, and I basically followed his career. And like I say, I was a big fan, and when I watched him and Morrison fight, I was really excited. I was kind of rooting for both the guys because I liked both of them at that point, and that was just that was the one that really got me. I was like, man, this guy's awesome, you know. He just demolished Tommy Morrison.
Yeah, he did, and that was, you know, both guys fighting each other in their prime. And remember, right. Ray-Mercer, because he was in the service, you know, he kind of started a little late. You know, he definitely started boxing late, and it would have been interesting to see if he had started his boxing career earlier. You know, as a young man, if it would have been any better. Not that I'm taking anything away from him, because I think he had a great career. But one of my favorite fighters, I think the biggest knock on him, or the biggest you know, negative for him, was his height. At 6'1", he just came at the wrong era. If he was 2 or 3 inches taller, I think we'd be talking a different talk about Ray-Mercer.
Right, but definitely against some of the bigger guys, you know, the taller guys, and you know, that's my whole argument. You know, what would it be like if you made everybody the same exact height and weight? How great, you know, who would really be the greats? Right. You know.
Well, this era, Ray-Mercer came along at the era when, you know, guys like Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko were changing the complexion of the heavyweight division. Now we were starting to see these 6'4+ guys, you know, in the heavyweight division, and 6'1" guys, which were the norm, you know, up to this point, like Ray-Mercer, all of a sudden are the small guy. And you know, if you stand next to Ray now, I mean, you're a big dude. You stand next to Ray, and you know, you still got to respect him. He's a big guy, you know, at 6'1", you know, so.
Right. Right. Just not as big as these giants now.
No, he's no 6'5" chiseled, you know.
Yeah.
Vladimir
and pretty
Klitschko.
athletic, you know. These guys can move around and bounce around, and you know, it's unbelievable what they've done.
That's the scary part. Any final thoughts on merciless Ray-Mercer?
Yeah, go on YouTube and watch some of his fights, especially the Cooper fight. That was a really entertaining brawl, and he actually had Cooper on the canvas in round 1, and both those guys were pretty tough. But Ray was a darn good fighter. He could be a little inconsistent, you know. He was right there a couple times, ready to get a title shot, and then he would lose a fight, you know. But he was really a good fighter, and he seemed like a pretty decent guy, you know. I watched a couple interviews, and I look forward to meeting him someday at the Hall of Fame. I think it'd be cool.
Yeah, he's a you know, is he going this year? I think I heard something.
I heard he was.
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah.
Tell him Billy C said hey, and that ask him how the food was at Sal's, and see you'll get.
I'll have to ask him if I run into him.
He'll be your buddy. You know what you could do? You could just whisper to him, say, hey, the food at Graziano's is nothing like Sal's, right? And he'll laugh and he'll agree with you, I'm sure. But
I'm sure.
Ray-Mercer, our heavyweight spotlight shining on him today. Former world heavyweight champion. His career record, 36 wins, 26 coming by knockout. He did have 7 losses, in which, like Jim and I mentioned earlier, he was only stopped twice. Once by Shannon Briggs, which was a knockout and a TKO stoppage against Vladimir Klitschko. He did have 1 draw in his career. He fought 253 rounds as a pro with a 59% knockout ratio. He's still going and looking good at 54 years old today. Ray-Mercer, our heavyweight spotlight today. And Jim, you did a great job as usual, and I look forward to our next one, my man.
All right, sounds good.
All right, Jim. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
That's Jim Curl. And listen, if you haven't caught any of his books, check them out. You can get a copy He's the new book that is out now. We're waiting to get the cover to put it up on the website. But if you're going up to the International Boxing Hall of Fame, make sure you stop by and see Jim Curley did the book on Sharkey, and he's got relatives of Jack Sharkey with him, and it's going to be a great time. Make sure you get a copy of that book, and don't forget, he's also got the Jersey Joe Walcott book out, which you can get a copy by visiting www.billycboxing.com and clicking in the book club, and there's a direct link where you can buy Jim's book right from there. Hey, listen, I got to take a break, and I'll be right back.